Okay, so earlier in the week, I had asked you guys, like, hey, what should we cover on the channel? And you guys had given me a lot of great options. And thank you guys for all those different options on things you want to see on the channel. But somebody did mention that, hey, you should cover Cloak and Dagger. And I kind of realized that we don't really talk a lot about those characters at all because honestly, they kind of fell in the background in Marvel Comics with all their different characters they push out over the years. Now, for Cloak and Dagger, unfortunately, for some fans out there, they kind of get labeled as horrible characters or nobody should care for these characters. But for me personally, that's incorrect because these characters are somewhat cool. And honestly, if they are given to a great writer, they can have some great stories. But unfortunately, again, they fell in the background when it came to Marvel Comics. But I felt like it would be a good idea to do a video on their first couple appearances in Marvel Comics. And really, they first appeared over in Spider-Man comics. You see, they first appeared over in Spectactular Spider-Man issue number 64. Now, they were created by a man known as Mantlo, and his main goal was to kind of give these characters some type of origin that ties into drugs. And let me explain, because in the opening pages of issue number 64, it's really more Spider-Man just swinging around New York believing that it's going to be a quiet night. But then out of nowhere, he hears a man calling out to him, and that man would be Simon Marshall. Now for Simon, he does play a major role in the supposed origin for Cloak and Dagger, and let me explain. You see, for Simon, we do learn that he is a pharmacist, but apparently he began to work for the mob. They gave him a lot of money to create a new type of drug to sell out there in the streets. The problem is that when it came time to test the drugs out on some children or teenagers, they supposedly were killed off. But 2 people have survived. Now for Simon, right now, he's freaking out. And the reason why, because he's being chased after by 2 people, Cloak and Dagger. Now, in the early days of Marvel Comics, when it came to Marvel, we didn't learn everything about the abilities of Cloak and Dagger early on. It took a while to kind of learn a tad bit more about their abilities. So by this point, all we know, like for example, when you have Spider-Man try to stop Cloak, you have Cloak, open up his cloak, and you have Peter fall into what seems to be another dimension of endless darkness. And that right there is all we get to know about Cloak's powers for the time being. Now for Dagger, we also learn that she has the ability to create these light construct of knives to use against her opponents. And right now, her opponent or target is Simon Marshall. Now we do learn here that for Cloak and Dagger, they were the 2 people who had survived the brand new drug that Simon had created for the mob when they were testing the drug out on different people. And so this is Cloak and Dagger saying a lot of people die by the drugs that you had created. You had to die for the crime that you had committed. And so by the time you have Peter being able to get out of Cloak's cloak, Dagger had killed off Simon. Now, when it comes to her dagger, it does seem like it has the ability to freeze the blood inside of him, but it also stab him as well. But either way, Simon is now dead. Now, for Spider-Man, he's really bothered about the idea of what Cloak and Dagger did to Simon, because in his mind says like, hey, listen, I understand this man did you wrong. And unfortunately, he did kill off a few people. But the thing is, you should have grabbed him, then hand him over to the police. And then hopefully the justice system would do right by us and put that man in jail. Now, the problem is that for Cloak and Dagger, they didn't come here to serve justice. They came here to get vengeance for what that man did to them by giving them that drug that gave them their powers. But that same drug did kill off other people who were with them when the testing was happening for this brand new drug that Simon had created. Now, for Spider-Man, his main goal is to stop Cloak and Dagger. But the problem is Cloak and Dagger are just way too powerful and hard for Peter to take down by himself. For example, for Dagger, When she does throw out her daggers, they will continue to follow you until they actually hit you. And so for Spider-Man, he's trying his best to get away from her daggers. Now for Cloak, we do learn here that he has the ability to teleport. And so he does teleport through the shadows of the area around Peter, stops Peter, and allow the daggers to hit Spider-Man. Now the daggers do not kill off Peter, but it does seriously hurt him. And it kind of feels like his blood is freezing inside his body at the moment. And so with Peter now being down for the count, you then have Cloak and Dagger being able to get away. Now, after that battle, you then have Peter head back home to get some rest. But after resting for a while, you then have Peter head over to the Daily Bugle. And the reason why, because the Daily Bugle keeps tabs on all the different open cases the police are currently working on inside the city. And so for Peter, he knew that this was the best way for him to learn more about Simon Marshall. Now, some of the things that Peter is currently learning is things we already talked about earlier in this video. The whole idea of Simon working with the mob to create a brand new drug to sell out there in the streets. Now, we do learn here that apparently they are working out of Ellis Island. Now, in our reality, Ellis Island is really important because in our reality, when it came to immigrants coming into America back in the day, they had to stop there first to kind of get a medical test done on them to see if they were allowed to come into our country. Now, in this reality, it's the same thing as well. But for Peter Parker, he kind of realized that if he goes back over to that island, he might find some more clues about Simon, the mob, but also Cloak and Dagger to learn more about them. Now, for Peter, when he does arrive, he believes that he can see the ghosts of the people who came here many years ago wanting to be part of our nation. But while you have Peter walking around, he then hears a loud scream for help. And so for Peter, he has to investigate. And we kind of find out that apparently it came from one of the members of the mob. Cloak and Dagger went out of their way to find the different people who had worked with Simon when it came to creating that brand new drug. But here's the thing, because we do get a flashback. And with this flashback, we do learn here that apparently the mob had kidnapped a bunch of teenagers from different parts of the country who were labeled as runaways. But here's the thing. They told these young kids like, hey, listen, if you come over to where we are right now, we can give you a place to stay, a warm bed, food to eat. You'll be safe with us. But in reality, they had used these young kids as test subjects on their brand new drug that they had created. And most of those kids had died except for two, Cloak and Dagger. Now, once you had all those kids die, you then had Simon and all his friends say, you know what, let's go ahead and shut down the entire operation and get the heck out of here before the police arrive and arrest all of us. But getting back over to the present day, you do have Spider-Man confront Cloak and Dagger. Now, this is Peter trying his best to express that he understands what they have went through and why they're going after the different members of the mob. But for Peter, it's still completely wrong. You do not kill. That right there is really important. So you do have Peter try to fight against Cloak and Dagger. But while trying to do that, you then have one of the members of the mob being able to break free, grab Dagger, and try to use her as a hostage. Now, you do have Peter being able to free Dagger from that one member of the mob. But you then have Cloak grab all these different members of the mob and say, you know what? It's time for you guys to die. He teleports outside and drops them 5 stories high. They all basically fallen to their death by the time Peter got over there to them. And so for Peter, he's kind of like, dude, what is wrong with you guys? But for Cloak and Dagger, once again, they had supposedly served justice, but more of they got their vengeance against the people who did them wrong. Now, you do have Cloak being able to grab Dagger and teleport away. And that does kind of wrap up the first time they had appeared in Spider-Man comics, but they did appear again a few issues later. Matter of fact, they reappeared again in a two-part storyline in Spectactular Spider-Man issue number 69 and 70. Now, getting into the opening pages of the storyline, we really do pick up with Cloak and Dagger going after a few drug dealers. Now, here's the thing, because yes, you do have them being heroes and being able to bring down these drug dealers, but the problem is that they want to know where in the world these dealers getting their drugs from. And so after you have Cloak and Dagger being able to take them down, you didn't have the leader of the group say, hey, fine, we'll tell you where our drugs are coming from. And that would be from Silver Mane. But now we have to jump over to Peter Parker. Now, when we do, it's really more of Peter Parker going back to the old home he grew up in when you had Uncle Ben and Aunt May being his guardians. Now, around this time in Marvel Comics, when it came to Aunt May, she no longer lived there. Matter of fact, she moved over into a nursing home. But by this point in Marvel Comics, she wants to now move back home and turn her home into a boarding house for elderly people to live in. But the problem is that she needs a lot of money. And for Peter, of course, he wants to help her out. Now, while you have Peter at his old house, he does hear police sirens. So he said, you know what? Let me go ahead and see what in the world is going on. Now, while you have Peter leaving as Spider-Man, well, somebody sees him, and that would be Nathan Lubinsky. Now, for Nathan, he was the boyfriend for Aunt May around his time in Marvel Comics, but he does remember that Aunt May told him that for some strange reason, Spider-Man is always around her and other people close to her. But getting back over to Peter, you have Peter head over to the scene of the crime. Now, when he does arrive, he realized that a bunch of drug dealers were stopped by somebody. Now, he realized it had to be Cloak and Dagger. And matter of fact, he finds them and he does confront them. But his goal is to now try to convince them to go ahead and give up the life as quote-unquote heroes and just be regular teenagers. The problem is that for Cloak, he believes they have some kind of duty to go out of their way to stop all of these different drug dealers around the world, especially right now in New York. Now, for Dagger, we get the idea that she's kind of thinking about wanting to quit and have a normal life again. But she has Cloak in her corner kind of saying like, hey, we can't do that. Like, remember, we have a goal here to stop all these bad people from pushing drugs out there into the streets. But she also realized that Spider-Man is not an enemy, that Spider-Man is trying to be their friend, trying to help them to get out of this life. But again, Cloak is in her corner. So unfortunately, you do have Cloak and Dagger being able to get the jump on Spider-Man and then just leave. Now, we do get a whole page where it's really more of us finding out what's going on in Peter's life around this time in Marvel Comics. See, for Peter, he was a teacher assistant in university, but he had quit that position because he wanted to focus more on the Daily Bugle to be able to help Aunt May out with the whole money issue. But the problem is that there's a lady known as Marcy Kane who went out of her way to tutor Peter to help Peter get his grades back up, to only hear that he's now kind of skipping classes all over again and hurting his chances to become a scientist. Now, there is another issue as well with a character known as Deborah. And for Peter, he kind of believes that the only reason why she wants to talk to him because him and her boyfriend got into a fight where Peter won, of course. But in reality, it's more because Deborah knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. But for Peter Parker, he does change into Spider-Man and head over to the police department to talk to Captain D. Wolf. And the reason why, because it's him trying his best to locate Silver Mane. That is his main goal. But she tells him, like, if you want any type of information on where in the world Silver Mane is at, you have to ask the Kingpin. And so, unfortunately for Peter, he has to talk to one of his enemies to find a different enemy of his. Now, for Peter Parker, he does head over to the home of the Kingpin. Now, Kingpin knew that Spider-Man was coming because, well, Kingpin has somebody inside the police department who told Kingpin, like, hey, Spider-Man is looking for Silvermane, but on top of that, Cloak and Dagger are also looking for Silvermane. Now remember, around this time in Marvel Comics, you had a lot of different big-time crime bosses. You had the Kingpin, but you also had Silvermane as well. And for Silvermane, he was a big rival for the Kingpin. So it only makes sense the Kingpin would give Peter some type of information of where Silvermane could be at to hopefully get rid of Silvermane. And so you do have Peter say, okay, you know what? I'm trying my best to find him. Kingpin says, here you go. He's over here. And by the way, I also know that Cloak and Dagger are also looking for him as well. Now for Peter, he tries his best to pretend he has no idea who Cloak and Dagger is, but it's the Kingpin. He has information on a lot of different people around the city. Now, around this time in Marvel Comics, when it came to Silvermane, he got severely injured in an earlier storyline where he had been placed on life support, basically. But his people had took him away and hid him at one of his homes. And so they have been watching over him this entire time. Now, with all that being said, as soon as Peter arrives, so did Cloak and Dagger, because they were following Peter Parker right after he left the home of the Kingpin. Now, this leads into a big battle. Spider-Man, Cloak, Dagger, and also the men who work for Silvermane. But getting to the very end of this chapter, you do have Cloak being able to cut the cords that were basically being used as life support for Silvermane. And so for Peter Parker, he now believes that Silvermane is officially dead right in front of them. Cloak and Dagger were able to achieve their goal once again, getting rid of another huge drug problem in New York. And so then you have Cloak and Dagger just dip out. Now, when they dip out, it only leaves Spider-Man on his own to fight against the forces of Silvermane. But the problem is that it's just him against all these different guys with weapons. So you have Peter also realize he should dip out as well, which he does. Now, right after Peter leaves, you then have the body of Silvermane go inside this iron container. Now, inside this container, it does have life support to keep Silvermane alive a tad bit longer. But the problem is his body is failing. So sooner or later, that body is going to die. His people have to work quickly to find a way to save the life of Silvermane. But they do actually have an idea. But I kind of want to jump over to Cloak and Dagger. And the reason why, because we're still continuing the whole idea of Dagger wanting to quit, which honestly makes a lot of sense because she's tired of the idea of being this quote unquote hero. She's a young girl. She's a teenager. She wants to have a normal life. But for Cloak, they can't stop. There's still people out there pushing drugs on innocent teenagers across the world. They have to stop those drug dealers who are also affecting runaways from all over the world as well. So you then have Cloak and Dagger continue to go after more drug dealers nearby. Now, we do get a page where it's really more of us seeing Peter Parker head over to the Daily Bugle. And the reason why, because he got some photos of his recent battle against the forces of Silvermane, but also Cloak and Dagger. So it's just him trying to make some money. But right after you have Peter leave the Daily Bugle, we then jump over to Silvermane, where we kind of find out what they did with the body of Silvermane. So yes, that iron container did keep him alive a tad bit longer, but they took out all the organs out of his body and put all those organs into a robotic body to basically make him a cyborg. Now, their game plan right now is to find him a brand new human body to use down the road. But the problem is, for Silvermane, he loves the idea of his robotic body. He feels the strength of this body and wants to keep it. And so his main goal now is to get revenge against Cloak and Dagger. So he leaves. But the problem is that his people were not able to inform him like, yes, your robotic body is very strong, but your organs are not. Your brain is not. Your organs still fail. If your organs fail, you are going to die. But either way, he still leaves to go hunt down Cloak and Dagger. But now we have to jump over to Peter Parker and Deborah. Now, again, it's Deborah want to have a conversation with Peter. She knows that Peter is Spider-Man. But the thing is, Peter sees a news report about all these different drug dealers turning themselves in. And so for Peter, he also hears that it's because of 3 superpower beings. Now for Peter, he only knows 2 at the moment, Cloak and Dagger. So he's kind of wondering who in the world is the 3rd person. So he leaves before Deborah is able to tell him that she knows that he is Spider-Man. Now, for Silvermane, he does go after some drug dealers who were the ones who kind of told Cloak and Dagger who was their supplier. It was, of course, Silvermane. And so you have Silvermane trying his best to get some info out of them, but you didn't have Spider-Man arrive. And so you do have the 2 characters being able to do battle in the middle of the subway tunnels. Now, while you have the 2 characters battling against one another in the subway tunnels, you also have Cloak and Dagger appear as well, because they overheard that apparently there's some guy looking for them. And of course, it would be Silvermane. And so their main goal is to find him again and to hopefully kill him, quote unquote, again, to hopefully stop him from pushing drugs onto people in this area. And so this kind of leads into the ending of the storyline, because now we're seeing Cloak, Dagger, and Spider-Man fighting against Silvermane. And the thing is, the battle only ends because of Dagger, because you have Dagger go out of her way to throw her daggers right at Silvermane. But when she does that, she causes his robotic suit to short circuit. And so it does seem like Silvermane is officially dead. And so you do have Cloak and Dagger leave once again. But again, for Peter, those 2 guys are killers. Like, yes, they're trying to stop bad people, but they're going at it in the wrong way. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.